We all use EQ to shape and control our mixers, and we all have our favourite tool to do that. Today I'm going to review the new SplitEQ from Eventide that gives us a plugin to not only EQ in the traditional sense, but is giving us a completely new way to approach EQing that they claim is simply a new and better tool. But is it good enough or different enough to replace your current favourite? Well, let's dive in and take a deeper look. This video is in partnership with the Produce Like a Pro YouTube channel, who are also running a fantastic giveaway of 3 licenses to this brand new SplitEQ plugin. The link to the giveaway, along with all the other relevant links, are in the description, so if you fancy owning this plugin for free, then be sure to go and get your entry in before the competition closes. But before you do that, stick around and let me give you my take on this plugin, its main features, usability, and why it's more than just a run-of-the-mill EQ. SplitEQ is an 8-band parametric EQ that splits your source audio into 2 different streams. And these streams are transients and tonal streams. Now, using an EQ is, of course, a fundamental part of mixing or mastering music, and understanding this tool is key to creating a balanced mix. So it's likely that you've already put hours of work into using and understanding the power of a parametric EQ. And then once you got your head around the basic concept of EQing, you probably then learned about mid-side EQ, where the spectrum is split differently to traditional stereo, and we're able to apply EQ adjustments to just the mid signal or the difference signal, otherwise known as the side signal. Now, Eventide's new SplitEQ has given us another option for manipulating audio. I'm not sure if it's the first one to do it, to be honest. I think there are other plugins out there that do it. But this is the first time I've had a chance to explore it in depth. And for me, that's being able to EQ the transient signal separately to the sustained or the tonal signal, which is a whole new concept to get your head around, much like mid-side EQ probably was when you first started using that. Now, in my opinion, this plugin deserves serious consideration given the pedigree of the developer, Eventide. Now, they have been in studios since the 70s and are famous for outboard units like the H3000 and the H910 harmonizer. And they were at the forefront of digital technology. They were one of the leaders in this field. And so whenever Eventide come out with a new product, it's usually something that's worth further investigation. So Eventide, basically, they know their stuff. So at the very least, grab the free trial and try it for yourself. You don't have to take on board what I say today. Just have a go yourself. You've got nothing to lose. You never know. It might spark some new vein of creativity for you. Okay, so why is this different? How is it unique, if at all, from any of the other EQ plugins that we have to choose from on the market? Well, it does this split stream thing that we mentioned before, the transient tonal split. And what Eventide's done is they've developed this technology that's patented, and it's called the structural split algorithm. And what it does is it splits the transient and the tonal signals into 2 separate areas for independent control. And how it identifies the 2 different streams is it will look at any rapidly changing parts of a signal and consider that to be transient. And then it'll take a look at the remaining sustaining elements. It would consider those to be tonal material. And then once it splits them, you can manipulate each part separately. So this is why I say it's a little bit like the mindset you might have for using a mid-side EQ. And on this starter screen here that you get nicely explains what you could regard as transient and what you would regard as tonal. So for example, transient would be things like string noise and clicks, pops, any percussive sound, sibilant sounds, any drumstick hitting a drum, or a thud. And what it regards as tonal or sustaining sound would be any resonances or vowels, boom, boxiness, reverb tails, room sound or air, harmonics. You get the idea. So once you've got that concept kind of grasped, you can then use the plugin pretty intuitively, I think. So looking at the layout of this plugin, the thing that sticks out to me immediately is that it looks like an EQ plugin should look, to me anyway, and that makes it extremely intuitive to use. It just looks how an EQ plugin should look. And in some respects, it might remind you of other EQ plugins that might be on the market, but it does operate in quite a different way. One thing that's nice is that it's actually resizable, if that is a thing for you. And so what you get are 6 bands, and you get the filters at either end. So you get a low cut and a high cut filter. Now you can't have any more than these 8 bands, but you can obviously move these around as you need to wherever you feel that you need to place them to do your work. So with the bands are centered at these node points here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and at the bottom you've got all your traditional kind of choices where you've got the filter types. You've actually got an option to solo the band, and you can either solo the transient or the tonal portion of the band as well as the band as a whole. You've got the gain that you can type in manually if you so desire, and then at the bottom here you've got your Q, which again you can just type in manually, or I'm sure there's a keyboard shortcut that you can use to adjust that. So looking at this first band here, it's centered at the 100 Hertz frequency, and when you hover over the node you get these 2 kind of coloured tags. The top tag is blue, and blue represents the tonal quality of the band, and the green represents the transient quality of the band. And so you can click and just use it like you would a traditional EQ. You know, let's change that to a peak filter, for example, you know, just exactly how you're used to using. And then what you can do is you're given the option to either just adjust the transient or the tonal portion of the band completely independently of each other. So Q wise, you can just mouse around down here and you can alter the Q of both parts by clicking the center here, where these up and down arrow are, and just dragging up or down, or you can just click the green or the blue and adjust them independently. And so that's all you need to know, really. It's, if you've ever used an EQ, which I'm sure you have, that is pretty self-explanatory. Then you've got, as I just mentioned, you've got the ability to solo the band, which is really helpful, especially if you're trying to find a particular trouble spot in the sound source that you're listening to. But now, of course, you can just solo the tonal aspect or solo the transient. The filters at either end, you can change the slope all the way up to 96 dB per octave. You can solo it like you can any other band. You can adjust the gain, you can adjust the Q and activate it and deactivate it with that button there. Behind this layout you have a really usable real-time spectrum analyzer that you can use for that visual cue when it comes to finding things like resonances or trouble spots, so that you can really hone in on the general area that you might want to fix based on what you're hearing. And just so that you can see that in action, let me just solo up an acoustic guitar for you. So I just flicked over to the edit window here, just so that I could mute this and just show you the display, which is really informative. And what you can do is it's got several options that are all in real kind of plain English, so easy to understand and simple. You can, of course, turn the analyzer on or off if you so desire, so that you cannot be swayed by what your eyes are telling you, and just use your ears if that is your preference. Now, at the bottom of the plugin, there are some controls that affect how the algorithm works. So they're pretty important and deserve a full read of the manual to understand what they do. But they're all about this structural split engine that divides the incoming source audio into these 2 streams. So first of all, there is this source area down here that's unlocked, and you get these different choices. The tooltips actually are really good and help you around the plugin. So it's giving you a helpful hint there that this is the algorithm. And the idea is that you just choose the best one or the closest one to what it is that you're actually working on. But this does stuff behind the scenes that I'm not particularly sure about. So the manual says that you don't have to stick with these choices, because ultimately it's up to you what you want to do with your sounds, and you can go to town creating all sorts of different new and interesting soundscapes by just perhaps choosing something that you wouldn't normally choose. So that's the first step in using this plugin, really, is to choose the correct source material down here so that the algorithm gives you the best result. Next is this section here, the transient section, and you've got choice of between separation and decay. Now, the separation is the main control for fine-tuning the split of the two streams, and it's controlling the transition point that the algorithm uses to define what is a transient and what is tonal. So increasing this means that less of the sound will be classed as transient, and so decreasing obviously will have the opposite effect. Then the decay, this is the release time for the transients. So increasing this affects the time and frequency of the transitions from transient to tonal. And then at the end here, we've got smooth, which just basically smooths out the speed of the decisions, if you like, that the algorithm makes. And you can use it to slow down the attack of the transients if you so desired. I think when you're first starting to use a new plugin like this that is so powerful, it's often best to just stick with what you're given at default. And then once you get the sounds that you're after, is just to play around with these and see how they affect the sound, and then fine tune them from there. There's an extra solo button here that you can use to solo, again, the transient or the tonal signal separately. I think it's a bit easier to find there. Although I believe you can use these buttons up here. But we'll have a play with that in a second. So what I want to look at now is the pan, because this is really interesting. This plugin lets you pan the transient separately or independently from the tonal, which is, again, pretty mind-blowing. And you can do this on each different band. And so that is a run round of the various aspects of the interface. Down the right-hand side here, you have got transient and tonal, so you can solo just the transient or just the tonal section here if you wanted to. And also you can globally adjust the whole transient portion of the entire frequency spectrum in one fader move here if you wanted to. So you could have created a whole range of different transient boosts and cuts across your signal and want to increase the whole lot of them in one go if you wanted to, or decrease them, and you can do that with this slider here. And the same goes for the tonal, the sustaining portion of your signals. Once you've made all your moves of all the different sustains, then you can just move the whole lot if you wanted to. So when you first start out using this plugin, the manual suggests that you would initially choose the best source down here, so whatever it is you're working on, and then use the solo function so that you can focus in and find the areas that are troubling you when you're listening to your signal. When you're using a plugin like this, where you have infinite possibilities, it's always best to go into it with a goal in mind. So listen to your source signal, decide what you like or don't like about it, and then go looking for it in the plugin using the solo functions, or you would just do it in context of whatever it is you're listening to, whether it's the instrument group or the whole mix, and make your decisions that way. So that's it, really. This plugin, go into it with a different mindset, thinking transients and sustain or tonal. So you listen to your source. What do you like? What don't you like? Is it a transient thing? Is it a sustaining thing? Okay, let's go in and fix it. Choose your source, pick a band, and then go about finding the problem or enhancing the good stuff. For me as a mix engineer, I can see me using this probably more as a corrective tool, but for you music producers or beat makers out there, this will likely open up a whole new world of opportunities in sound design if that's what floats your boat. So for me, the question is, will this replace my favourite EQ, which with those of you that have watched my channel will likely know that it's the FabFilter Pro Q3. And Eventide have openly announced that this plugin is designed to go beyond and to replace your current EQ. So they've made no bones about that. Right, let's have a look at the SplitEQ in action then on some typical source recordings. So I've got a bunch of recordings here that are all straight from recording sessions. There's nothing been applied to them, and maybe a little bit of compression here and there, but nothing drastic. What you're hearing is how they were sent to me or how I received them. So this vocal here is the first one that I want to have a little listen to. So let's take a listen and see what it's all about.
That there's so much more to these simple words and the promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh.
Okay, nicely recorded, not too sibilant. Maybe it could do with a little bit more body, and there's a little bit of a plosive pop halfway through that might be nice to get rid of.
Words and the promises
on promises. So first thing we need to do is change the source. So at the moment it defaults to full mix. Well, that's not really the best choice, so let's pick vocal. So what I want to do, I just want to listen to this vocal now, and I think what I might do is solo the transient and then solo the tonal parts of the recording, so you can kind of get it fixed in your head what each might sound like on a vocal.
That there's so much more to these simple words and the promises that you always heard.
Okay, so you can really hear a distinct difference there between the two streams. And also the two are represented on the spectrum analyzer. If you take a look again, you'll notice that we see the transient material is kind of like a green colour, and then the blue tonal is sort of transposed over that. So just have a little look at that on the display.
That there's so much more to these simple words and the promises that you always heard.
Okay, so it's a really great way to see the two in relative terms to each other, and to help in that sort of fact-finding mission of where you might want to start to go in and focus in on any problems. My first problem on this vocal is that sort of popping, which I'm trying very hard not to do on my mic now that we're focused on it. So let's find it first of all.
Promises that you...
That'll be it then. Promises. Okay. First of all, let's solo the transient and listen to the word promises.
Promises.
It's quite prominent there. Now let's just check it out on tonal.
Promises.
And it's quite soft there. So as it was suggested on the helpful tooltips, popping is part of the transient stream. So let's try and go in and fix that. With a plosive or a popping sound like that, the first thing I usually do is just apply a low-cut filter. And typically it would probably go up to 100 or maybe 150 to get rid of a really bad pop. And rather than affecting the entire track with that cut, particularly if it's affecting the body, you might want to just process that one audio clip. The idea with this plugin is, though, that we can go in and we can tame that transient, we can pull it down and then boost a little bit more of the tonal element of that frequency so that we don't lose any of the body, and therefore, in effect, maybe we can keep it on all the way through the track. So let's do that.
Promises that you always heard.
What you see here is on the low cut filter, the two little tags, so the blue and the green being the transient. So let's pull that up a little bit and let's get it up to about 100 hertz and see if that helps us.
Promises that you always heard.
And then bypassed it.
Promises that you always heard. Promises that you always heard.
Yep, that's working well on that pop. I think I might just take it up a little bit further, so we can do that here and move the band up a little. Let's go up to, say, 120. And then you notice that the tonal portion is actually mirroring the move as well. So if we didn't want that, we could just pull that straight back down to the bottom of the spectrum. And I could perhaps opt to choose for a filter here. Again, we know it's the transient material, so I'm just going to grab hold of the green tag and pull the filter down. And what that's doing is it's giving us that nice kind of curve there, so the filter's actually starting to be applied more or less about 300 hertz there. Let's see what that sounds like.
Promises that you. Promises that you. Promises that you.
It's not quite as effective, so I think what I'll do is I think I will zero that and go back to the idea here of a low cut filter. So let's now find where the body of this vocal recording is. See if we can add a little bit more warmth back in.
Promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh.
So it's around about there, about 200 hertz, I think. So let's just dial that in.
Promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh.
Okay, I think that sounds reasonably good. I think what I want to do actually is I will pull that up, the low cut filter up now on the tonal aspect of the signal because of this boost here that we've now done, which is bringing up a little bit in this area here where that popping is occurring. So I just want to control that a little bit more. Let's say 60 hertz, see what that sounds like.
Promises that you always heard.
I think that's got it. Let's just bypass.
Promises that you always heard. Promises that you always heard.
Yeah, I think that's helped the popping. Still a little bit present there, but I do actually really like the body that has been introduced here. I need to be careful with this sort of area though, because this can quite quickly turn to mud when it's all kind of dialed into the mix. And when you've got reverbs going on and delays on a vocal, then you do usually need to pay a little bit of attention to that sort of 200 hertz area. So what about if we wanted to add a little bit more kind of presence to this vocal, so that if we were wanting to help it cut through the mix, then we might want to add something around about 1K or 1.5, 1.2, that sort of area. So let's have a go, first of all, with the transient and see what that sounds like.
Promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh. Promises that you always heard.
Okay, yeah, that's doing the job of bringing the presence out in this particular vocal. But let's try with the tonal aspect, see what that's doing. Let's try that there now.
Promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh.
Now, I actually quite like that, the sound of that as well, so maybe we can apply a little bit of both. Now I'm going to bring back the transient in that area.
Promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh.
Yeah, I like that. What you can do is you can kind of click in between the two areas there and adjust them simultaneously. So you can really fine tune the placement of your curves. And lastly, what about if we want to add a little bit of air? It is kind of dull sounding, so when it's in a mix, it's really going to need a little bit of something to help it cut through. But the problem you can get here is it can introduce harshness. Let's play around in this area and see if we can bring a little bit more sort of mid-range boost to complement this 1.2K boost we've done here.
Promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh. Promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh. Promises that you always heard. I don't care. Promises that you always heard. I don't care, just don't let me go. Oh.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. So I will stick with that, I think. Let's just have a play with this transient separation and see how that playing with that makes the sound change.
That there's so much more to these simple words and the promises that you always heard. I don't care.
So fully up there at 100%, it's certainly taking the edge off the transients. So it's leaning more towards the tonal aspect of the sound when the algorithm is deciding what is transient and what is tonal. And the decay, let's see what that's doing.
That there's so much more to these simple words and the promises that you always heard.
It's less obvious, but there is a kind of a edginess comes into it when you start getting up to that 100% again. So I'm going to leave that to, again, at its default setting of 30%. Smooth, that's again... smooths the transitions between the transient and tonal regions. These are all really kind of fine-tuning things and so can be quite subtle, but let's play with it and see if it makes any obvious change.
That there's so much more to these simple words.
Yeah, it kind of got a bit dull there, so let's pull that back.
That there's so much more to these simple words and the...
Yeah, so it is really subtle. So once you've got your sound dialed in, you might want to go in here and just fine tune it so that perhaps it's not quite so harsh or quite so soft sounding. So put that back to 10 milliseconds. So let's move on now to the bass guitar. And let's have a listen to what this guitar sounds like. Okay, sounds as though it's been played with a pick and it's got quite a bit of transient component to it that I think I particularly want to control, and also it's not got an awful lot of body or warmth, so let's see if the split EQ can help us there. Let's, first things first, go to the source and choose the most appropriate. So we've got bass. First thing I want to do then is to start to introduce a little bit of warmth to this guitar. So the analyzer is showing us there on the blue display that the lowest signals are in this sort of area here around about 100 Hertz. I think because it's quite lacking in low end, I think I want to approach this first of all with a shelf. So let's dial that in and see what that sounds like. Yeah, Yeah, that's working really nicely. Bringing up that tonal aspect, the sustain of the low end on this bass guitar. So now I'm going to go to the opposite end where we've got that string noise, that transient, scratchy, spiky sound. I want to try and find that. So I imagine that's going to be around about 3, somewhere maybe 2.5 up to 5 or 6K even. Let's just solo the transients here and locate the area where the bulk of that pick sound is. So if I come down to band 5, and if I choose to solo the transients, let's see if we can find the area where they are more prominent. Right there, right on 2.5K. So let's come out of solo and let's pull this frequency down a little bit to try and control it. Sounds better. Let's bypass it. So this is bypassed. It's really controlled it. I think that my boost there might be a little bit too much, so I'm going to pull that down, and I think my cut here is a little bit too much too, so I'm going to add that back in, and let's just do a before and after check on that now. Better, just rolling that back down the spectrum a little bit down to 110 rather than 150. Whilst we're down at this end of the spectrum, let's solo that band. So you can hear it sounds really warm, round and soft. Let's now solo the transient band. You can hear how that's much faster, and it's almost like palm muting or palm plucking on the guitar. I'm just going to come out of solo and see how that now sounds. Actually quite like how that's given that low end a little bit more kind of point and focus. I don't think this guitar is particularly muddy now that we've made these adjustments. Well, let's have a scout around and see if we can find any mud. The mud is going to be tonal. Let's get a tonal node going here, and we're on band 2, and let's solo it, see if we can find some mud. If it's anywhere, it's going to be about there, which is around about 200 hertz. So let me get that back to 0, and then I'll listen to the full signal and pull a little bit of mud out and see whether it's making it sound better or worse. I think that's actually making it sound a lot better. It tightened up the low lows on this bass and has given it much more focus. And this is typically an area, if it were in a mix, you would look to around about 200 hertz to cut a little bit on bass guitar, just to keep that low mid area all under control. So let's do one final check on this bass guitar. I'm going to bypass it and then unbypass it, see if we've done any good or if we've made it worse. Yeah, I think we're certainly making it sound better. I think what I'd like to do is maybe drop the transient down a little bit in that low end, and I think I'm going to split the difference there. Now that I've pulled that mud out, I've just lost a little bit of oomph down there, so let's see what that's like now. Yeah, I like how that's sounding. That's good. That's bass guitar. What that's done is we've controlled that sort of plucky, annoying frequency around about 2.5K from the pick on the strings, pulled a little bit of mud out at 200 hertz, and boosted both a little bit of transient and tonal material at the low end to give it a little bit of warmth. Next, I want to look at an acoustic guitar. So let's take a listen to this, see what that is sounding like. So same tune as the bass, and it is very spiky sounding. It's been strummed very hard, again with a pick. So we've got that plasticky, or maybe even metallic twang that's coming into the upper registers of this acoustic. You can see it's a very dynamic part as well from the waveform. So later on down the line, we might choose to use compression on this to keep it all in control. And if we don't kind of grab hold of those spikes now, it can really kind of affect the way that your compressor works and reacts to the sound. My aim for this then is perhaps, again, similar to the bass guitar. I want to get rid of those kind of spiky transients, and then maybe let's give it a little bit more warmth as well. So open up the plugin. First things first, source, let's choose guitar. There's no acoustic option here, so let's just go with plain old guitar. Let's play it through. Let's have a look at the analyzer, see what that can tell us. So there's material down here that I perhaps want to control. It seems quite loud, boomy down here up to sort of 50 hertz. So we want to control that area as well. Down in that region, we've got kick drum, we've got bass guitar, so we don't want an acoustic down there as well. Unless it was a particularly sparse track, you might consider leaving it in. But let's go to our filter and use it as a regular EQ rather than the split streams here. So let's do that now. Okay, I'm liking that, 50 hertz. I went up too far just to tell my ears that that's too far, and you could blatantly hear it was too far, so I just pulled it down to where I felt as though I got a decent mix of low end, but without too much of that rumble. Next, let's have a look at the body, see if we can find some more warmth for this guitar. I think I'll change that to a peak. Oops. Not a notch, but a peak. Okay, let's have a go. Okay, I think that sounds pretty good. What I want to do is solo it just to make sure that I really do like it. Okay, I think I'll take that down a little bit further, down to 80 hertz. And then it'd be nice to listen to the transient down there as well. Okay, see what that's like. definitely sounding warmer. Let's look for some mud. So let's solo the tonal stream and look for some mud. Sounds quite muddy there, 195 Hertz. So I'm going to pull a little bit of that out. Take it out of solo first of all. Zero it, and then I'll pull out the mud. It's certainly got hold of the mud. What you can do is, I believe if you select Shift and move up with the mouse or down with the mouse, you can adjust the cue of the bell on the curve there, rather than having to mouse down here to this area down here. So I just narrowed down that bell a little bit, and then just check out how that sounds now. Yeah, I like that. Let's try and find that spiky end of the plectrum as well, see if we can help there. On the bass guitar, it was about 3.5K, wasn't it? So let's assume it might be in that sort of zone here. And this time, let's take the transient stream and let's boost to see if we can find the worst of it. About there, I think, but if you're not sure, you know, solo it and have a hunt around. I think that's about the worst of it, actually, getting up to about 5K, 4.7. The spectrum analyzer, of course, is helping us locate it. If we take a look at it, the spectrum analyzer, which you can do here, you can actually just decide to look at the transient stream on the analyzer. That looks like this. So you can see the spikes are all happening around about here. So let's put that back to split and let's pull out some of those transients. Yeah, I think that's working well. Interestingly, let's solo this tonal band in that same area there, see what that sounds like, because it might be that, you know, once you take away the transients that are poking out of the mix like that, you then kind of lose the guitar in the mix. So let's bring some of that tone back. Okay, so what does that sound like now? I think that's helped to kind of focus the guitar a little more now. What you can do, I've shown this earlier, you can grab the middle here and really, you know, you take away from one, it adds to the other. So that could be useful to fine tune that. Okay, let's bypass this and then I'll unbypass it to see if we've made it better. Yeah, I think I'm not sure about this area here. I think I might zero that, and I also think I might be a little bit too much here. it has a bit cleaner sounding. So I've addressed the main issues there that I had on this acoustic guitar. That's been that sort of the strike of the pick being quite annoying and spiky, and then just added a little bit of body down here around about 80 hertz. Again, you know, all these choices, we're doing this in solo, might not necessarily what I would do in a mix, because it completely depends on all the other instrumentation. So that's the acoustic guitar. And then what I've got next are some drums. This is a drum mix, very little in the way of effects on it, other than the natural room reverb that came over the mics during the recording. So let's take a listen to that now. Okay, let's open up SplitEQ, and down to the bottom let's choose full drum set. I think what I'd like to hear is a little bit more snap on the snare, and maybe see if we can clean up the low mids a little bit so that the kick is a little bit more prominent. So let's have a look at the analyzer, see what that's telling us. So the bass drum is down here around about 100 hertz and below 100 to 50 hertz. Let's see if we can find some mud in this recording, I think, first of all. I might do that here on this node, number 2. What we're getting there is a ring of the snare and the sort of resonance of the drum shells. That's not particularly nice, so I think I will pull a little bit of that out. That sounds a bit tighter. Just bypass and check it by bringing it back in. Yeah, I can hear the kick drum seems much more focused now. So let's try and find the snare. That's going to be transient material. So let's see if we can find that. Quite nice up there, really bringing out the snap and the snare wires, so that's working well up there. Now what about a little bit of mid-range boost to complement both the kick and the snare and to help them push through what could be a busy mix. Okay, and for good measure on this kick drum, I just want to double check what's happening down in this very low section. Could be that we think about applying a low cut filter down there. Yeah, I think I was taking away too much from the low end punch of the kick, so I'm not going to use a low cut filter on this mix. So let's bypass this and bring it back in, see if it's done any good. I would say so. It really brings out the hi-hat work, and the snare has got a lot more zing to it. Another thing we can do with this particular recording is we could play around with some panning. So if we opt down at the bottom here and choose pan, we're given this range of controls. So what we've got here is the option to be able to pan our transient material away from our tonal material. Another thing we can do is actually just make one particular band a little bit wider to really accentuate the stereo-ness of the recording. You wouldn't necessarily do this down low, but you would do it in the sort of 1K upwards. And what you're trying to do is just spread out the cymbals a little bit more, or make it seem as though the room is a little bit bigger that the drums are recorded in. You're given a helpful tool tip here: drag to adjust the pans together, double click to type a value. So let's see what that sounds like. If I do it on this band, number 5 band, which is up in sort of like the 6.5K area. Well, that was a bit weird, wasn't it? If you're listening on headphones, yeah, I'm not sure about that in this particular case, but just the creativity that you've got at your fingertips here to really manipulate the stereo field. It's amazing. So let's try something a little bit different. Let's try and widen that area, that 6.5K, those cymbals and the snare wires, to make them seem a little bit larger. So alternatively, you can narrow them as well. I quite liked where they were, actually. So I'll get that back to the normal position. But I'm going to try the same thing down here in the 1K. See what widening that sounds like. Yeah, just a tiny bit is all you need. Let's just bypass that, and I'll unbypass and just see if we can hear how much wider the drums sound. Yeah, it works really nicely. Less is more, of course, saying that it depends on what it is you're actually trying to achieve. But you've got the tools here to go ultra creative and do all sorts of crazy things with your stereo field and the sound stage as a whole. This is a fantastically musical EQ. It just sounds natural, and it gives really clean results without any kind of phasing that I can hear anyway. But more than that, it's a tool that will really get your creative juices flowing, because it forces you to think outside the box and approach your mix from an entirely new perspective. And when you're kind of stuck in a mix and you've run out of ideas, a tool like this can really kind of kickstart your enthusiasm for the mix all over again. For me, the new frequency and panning manipulation possibilities this plugin gives me, along with the creative opportunities that are unlocked, are what makes this EQ plugin quite special. I love the concept of being able to EQ transients and tones separately in a familiar and easy to use package. And don't forget, if you want to use it like a normal EQ, you can do that too. I miss the dynamic aspect of my favourite FabFilter Pro Q3, but that's not something that I need in every mix. I like how the spectrum analyzer shows me the 2 streams, so I can instantly see which stream to focus on first. Now, there's a lot going on under the hood of SplitEQ that thankfully I don't have to worry about. I can just use it and get great results fast. So it's a winner for me. If you like the look of this plugin and you'd love to own it, don't forget to head down to the competition link in the description for your chance to win your very own copy of this exciting new tool. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.